Hello again. What did I hear? Oh, I know. I heard that in Baltimore, the 6 police officers that have been charged with various crimes, some, or one in particular, a heinous case of murder. Now, the good news is that the grand jury will have to determine whether or not there's sufficient evidence to prosecute any one of these or all of these 6 policemen. I sat on a grand jury. If you're a new viewer of mine, you probably wouldn't know that, but I did sit on a grand jury, and I understand how they operate. There's a fairly extensive weeding out process that's done initially to select the jurors. And then a number of jurors that get through the selection process end up getting seated. And when they get seated, the first order of business is to learn the law. And they'll go through every single law that are on the books in that particular state. They'll understand, or they'll have a rudimentary understanding of every single law. They have to have in order to be able to judge the cases that they're presented. Most grand juries aren't seated for one particular case. They can be there for 5 or 6 months, depending on how many have to be heard, how many cases have to be heard. The good news is that once they're seated and once they understand the law, they listen to the prosecutor, and they're free to ask any questions that they wish to ask. And then what happens is there's a vote, and the majority rules. It isn't like an actual jury where you have to have a consensus. You just have to have the majority rule. And if the majority feel that there's sufficient grounds, then what's determined is, the verbiage that's used is a true bill. And then what happens is, after they determine as to whether or not they have a true bill, the judge will come in and review the findings of the grand jurors. And then they'll go and prosecute if that's what they intend to do. Hopefully, the people that will be seated will not have any bias against blacks or whites. And what's really interesting is we have 3 of each. If we had 6 whites, I would really be fearful. But we have 3 of each. And the most heinous charge of murder has been applied to the driver of the van. And he happens to be black. Now, I'd really like you to take some time and view the video of when Freddie Gray is being hauled off to the paddy wagon. And I do mean hauled off. Focus on his legs. They're not working. He cannot support himself. Watch his legs dangle from his body as the officers are carrying him, literally lifting him, carrying him to the back of the paddy wagon. The reason that is that the man had a broken neck and a crushed larynx. Now, that happened to him when an officer was trying to restrain him, and he had his knee on his neck with Freddie on the ground. That's what happened. And what happened here is this prosecutor, Marilyn Mosby, has ambitions for herself and her husband. I think she's destroyed both of their careers by accusing these 6 officers of crimes that they did not commit. I'm convinced the grand jury will rule the same way in the Baltimore case as they did in the Ferguson case. I'm also convinced that when that happens, Baltimore will probably be obliterated from the face of the map of Maryland. Why? Because you got savages in Baltimore. You got savages in most inner cities that are just looking for an excuse. And they're going to have it. And it's all going to fall on Marilyn Mosby's neck. And that worthless, useless mayor, Stephanie Burke. That's sort of what I think. Once again, I'm glad it's going to go to a grand jury, and I'm convinced they're not going to produce a true bill, and the case against these officers will be dropped. And that's when Baltimore will light up by the savages that are just looking for an excuse. And it just won't be Baltimore. It'll be a number of cities, inner cities, that have savages. That's sort of what I think. So what do you think?